Now we're ready to start implementing our database design in SQL Server Management Studio. First, let's explore the data model I've developed for the Two Trees Olive Oil Company. I've decided that we need 4 tables in order to store information about our customers, their invoices, the line items that appear on those invoices, and the products that are being ordered. Notice that I've settled on a camel case naming convention that doesn't use any spaces in either the field names or the table names. Now let's take a look at the relationships between these tables. We'll see that I have established 3 one-to-many relationships between these tables. Okay, let's go ahead and start implementing this data model inside of SQL Server Management Studio. First, I'm going to go ahead and connect to the SQL Server. I'm just going to use Windows Authentication and say connect. And that'll start it up. I'll come over here to the left-hand side in the Object Explorer, and I'll expand the database folder. Then I'm going to right-click on that and say create a new database. It's going to ask me for a database name here. I'm going to call it Two Trees. Go ahead and say OK. And that'll create a new database object over here in the Object Explorer. Let's go ahead and expand that open, and we'll see all the different objects inside of the Two Trees database. So I'll right-click on Table and choose Table to create a new data table inside of my database. Now this opens up a design window that almost exactly mimics our table design worksheets that I've set up. That makes it very easy to fill in these column names and details for each of the fields. So the first table is going to be about our customers, and the first field is Customer ID. I'll type in Customer ID as the column name, and the data type is going to be an auto-incrementing integer. I'll click on Data Type, and you'll see with the drop-down list we have lots of different choices to choose from, or I can just start typing. I'm going to type in int to choose the integer data type. In order to make it a auto-incrementing integer, I'll come down here to the column properties. Let me just pull this up a little bit here, and I'm going to come down and scroll until I get to the identity specification here. Let me expand that open. I'm going to change this isIdentity from no to yes. That'll set identity increment to 1 and identity seed to 1. This will create an auto-incrementing number that we can use as our primary key. In order to establish this as the primary key, I'll click on the key icon up here. Now I've got a customer ID as the primary key and it auto-increments. Let's go ahead and fill in some additional columns. The next field is going to be my first name. I'll press Tab to go to the data type. And this is going to be a variable character or varchar data type that will allow 50 characters. So for that, I'll type in varchar, and in parentheses, I'll type in 50 and press enter. The next is going to be last name. And again, this is a varchar 50 as well. The next field is going to be our billing address. This will be a varchar at 100 characters. Then we've got our billing city. This will be a varchar at 50 characters. There we go, varchar. And the next one is going to be our billing state. Now for this, we're just going to store a 2-letter state abbreviation. So we'll call this varchar, open parentheses, and 2. And then finally, we have our billing zip. For the data type for the zip code, we're going to store that as a varchar with 5 characters. Okay, over here we have allow nulls, and if I turn any of these checkboxes off, that'll essentially require this particular field in this table. So in this case, I want to choose the first name and last name as required fields. So I'll turn allow nulls off for that. Let's go ahead and save this table. I'll press the save icon up here, and it'll ask me for a name. I'll call it customers, and we'll say OK. Now I can go ahead and close this table out. I'll press the close button here on the tab. And in my tables, I'll right-click over here in the Object Explorer and choose Refresh. And then I'll expand this open. You'll see the new Customers table has been added to the list here. So now let's go through and create the other tables we need. Once again, I'll right-click on Tables, choose Table. This time we're going to create the Invoices table. So the first field is Invoice ID. The data type is going to be int. And once again, it's going to be an auto-incrementing, so I'll scroll down in the properties till I get to identity specification. I'll change isIdentity to yes, and that'll make it an auto-incrementing value, and I'll turn on the primary key here. Next, we're going to choose invoice date as the next column name, and this is going to be a date field. Next is going to be customer ID. That's going to be an integer field. This will link to the integers in the customers table. And then finally, we have method of payment. This is going to be a text field, but I'm going to limit its values to only being able to store either credit card or purchase order. So in this case, I'm going to choose varchar at 14 characters, which is the maximum number of characters in the words purchase order. We'll go through and create the constraint in just a moment. Let's go ahead and close this table. And when it asks me, let me go ahead and say cancel here. And I'll press the save icon first. And we're going to call this invoices. Say OK. And then we'll close this table. Let's go ahead and make another table. I'll right-click over here in the Object Explorer and say Table. This is going to be our line items. So we'll choose Invoice ID is the first field with a data type of int. The next field is going to be line item number. And its data type is also going to be int. Now together, both of these are going to be a concatenated primary key. So I'll go ahead and select this first line here, shift-click on the second line, and then I'll press the primary key button up here to set both of those as a concatenated value. Let's go ahead and go down to this next line here, and we'll say our product ID field is next. And that is an integer. And finally, we want to know the quantity of the number of products that were ordered. And that's going to be an int as well. OK, let's go ahead and save this table. We'll call it line items. Go ahead and say OK. And then we can close this table. And then one more table, we'll right-click on tables again, choose table from the menu. This is going to be our products table, so product ID is the first field. It's going to be an integer. And once again, this is going to be an auto-incrementing, so I need to go down here in the properties, find identity specification, and change it to yes. There. Then we'll go ahead and set the primary key value here. And we'll fill in the next field is oil type. This is going to be a varchar at 50 characters. Then we've got bottle size. The data type for bottle size is going to be a numeric value, but I want to be able to store decimal values. So I'm going to call it with the float data type. And then finally, we've got weight. That's also going to be a float. And then we're going to choose price is our last field. And this is going to be a dollar value. So I'll open up the list here, and we'll choose money from the list there. So that's our fourth table. We'll go ahead and save it here. We'll call it products. We'll say OK. And I'll go ahead and close the table. Now if I right-click on tables over here, I can choose refresh, and you'll see all the different tables appear in the list. The next thing we need to do is add that constraint onto our method of payment in the invoices table. To do that, I'll go to my invoices table, and I'll expand it open. And I'll right-click on the constraint folder here and say New Constraint. Then in the expression over here in this window, I'll press on this little builder button over here. That'll bring up this check constraint expression area where I can type in the values. And I'm just going to type in a little bit of code here that says method of payment in, and then I'll open up a parentheses, and then inside of single quotes, I'll type in the values that will be acceptable for method of payment. In this case, credit card, closing quote, a comma, and then purchase order inside of single quotes again. I'll finish it off with a closing parenthesis, and we'll say OK. And that'll add a check constraint onto my method of payment that will only allow me to put in the values of either credit card or purchase order. Let's go ahead and say close. And that'll save that constraint into the data table. We'll close the data table, and it'll ask us to save it, and we'll save that out. And now we're done building our tables. So that's how we set up the data tables inside of SQL Server Management Studio by following our data model and the table design worksheets.